They called him just a digger, made jokes about people who work with shovels instead of brains, and treated him like he was invisible. The college-educated engineers thought the 45-year-old construction worker represented everything they'd studied to avoid becoming, until the day they found an unexploded bomb, and his real training was the only thing standing between them and disaster. Welcome to Stories of Secret Heroes. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden expertise and life-saving courage, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe that heroes often work with their hands while others work with their assumptions, hit that subscribe button and help us share stories that matter. The Meridian Tower construction project was the largest development in downtown Portland's history, a 40-story mixed-use complex that would house luxury condos, office spaces, and retail establishments. The project employed 150 construction workers, 20 engineers, and a management team that prided itself on cutting-edge design and precision execution. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez had been working the excavation crew for 8 months, operating heavy machinery and performing the foundational work that made everything else possible. At 45, he was older than most of the laborers, moving with the careful efficiency of someone who understood that construction sites were dangerous places where attention to detail could mean the difference between going home safely and not going home at all. Mike wore the standard construction uniform, hard hat, high-visibility vest, steel-toed boots and work clothes that could handle dirt, sweat, and the physical demands of building something from the ground up. His hands were calloused from years of manual labor, his face weathered from working outdoors, and his demeanor was quietly professional in a way that some people mistook for simplicity. The engineering team saw Mike as part of the equipment rather than as a person with complex experience and specialized knowledge. To them, he was the guy who operated the excavator, who dug holes where they told him to dig them, who moved dirt from one place to another according to specifications he couldn't possibly understand. What they didn't know was that Sergeant Michael Rodriguez had spent 15 years as an explosive ordnance disposal specialist with the U.S. Army, conducting over 400 bomb disposal operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He'd defused IEDs hidden in roadways, cleared munitions from schools and hospitals, and saved countless lives by carefully dismantling devices designed to kill soldiers and civilians alike. Mike had left the military in 2019 after his final deployment, suffering from mild PTSD and the accumulated stress of a career spent inches away from death. Construction work provided steady employment, physical activity that helped with his mental health, and the satisfaction of building something positive after years of destroying things that could destroy others. The mockery at the Meridian Tower site was institutional rather than personal, a reflection of the cultural divide between blue-collar and white-collar workers that permeated the construction industry. Engineers with college degrees saw themselves as the brains of the operation, while laborers like Mike were viewed as the muscles who implemented their intellectual designs. The worst offender was Trevor Walsh, a 28-year-old structural engineer with an MIT degree and an attitude that matched his prestigious education. Trevor had never worked with his hands, never operated heavy machinery, and never spent a day in an environment where physical danger was a constant reality. To Trevor, Mike represented everything his education had helped him avoid becoming. "Look at Rodriguez over there," Trevor would say to his engineering colleagues during their morning coffee breaks. 45 years old and still digging holes for a living. That's what happens when you don't invest in education and professional development. The comments weren't made directly to Mike, but they were loud enough for him to hear while operating machinery nearby. Trevor and his team would discuss people who work with shovels instead of brains, and make observations about the limited career options available to workers who hadn't developed technical skills. "I mean, what kind of future does someone like that have?" Trevor's colleague Brad would add. "Just manual labor until his back gives out, then what? No pension, no advancement, no intellectual stimulation. It's honestly kind of sad." Mike heard every word. He'd learned during his military service that people revealed their character through how they treated those they perceived as having less power or status. Trevor's comments said more about Trevor's insecurities than about Mike's capabilities, but the daily mockery still stung. The other construction workers respected Mike for his work ethic and professionalism, but even they didn't know about his military background. Mike had learned to compartmentalize his past, keeping his EOD experience separate from his current life as a way of managing the psychological transition from warfare to civilian employment. Mike's days at Meridian Tower followed a predictable pattern. He'd arrive at 6 a.m., perform safety checks on his excavator, and begin the careful work of moving earth according to the engineering specifications. His movements were precise and methodical, not just because excavation required accuracy, but because his military training had taught him that careless handling of dangerous equipment could have catastrophic consequences. What the engineers didn't realize was that Mike's approach to excavation was informed by years of experience reading ground conditions for hidden explosives. He could identify changes in soil density, recognize disturbed earth patterns, and notice anomalies that indicated something had been buried where it didn't belong. During his EOD career, Mike had learned to read the landscape like a textbook. Insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan had become increasingly sophisticated at hiding IEDs, requiring bomb disposal specialists to develop almost supernatural sensitivity to environmental details. Mike's eyes automatically scanned for signs that most people would miss: unusual soil coloration, unexpected metal debris, or ground disturbances that suggested human activity. These skills translated perfectly to construction work, where underground utilities, abandoned foundations, and buried debris were constant hazards. Mike could spot potential problems before they became expensive delays or safety issues, but his warnings were often dismissed by engineers who thought his hunches were less reliable than their technical drawings and ground-penetrating radar. "Rodriguez thinks there's something weird about that section," Trevor would tell his supervisor when Mike reported unusual ground conditions. "But the soil analysis shows standard composition. I think he's just being overly cautious because he doesn't understand the engineering." Mike would note the dismissal and continue working, knowing that his observations were based on experience that couldn't be quantified in engineering reports but had kept him alive in places where mistakes meant death. Tuesday morning, October 12th, started like any other day at the Meridian Tower site. Mike was operating his excavator in the northeast corner of the foundation area, carefully removing soil according to the engineering specifications for the building's underground parking structure. At 10:47 hour, his excavator bucket struck something metallic about 15 feet below ground level. The impact created a distinctive sound that Mike recognized immediately, not the hollow ring of a pipe or utility line, but the solid thunk of heavy steel that had been buried for decades. Mike shut down his excavator and climbed down to examine the obstruction. What he saw in the excavated soil made his blood run cold: the nose cone of what appeared to be a large military ordnance, partially exposed and clearly intact. Mike's EOD training kicked in immediately. He recognized the distinctive shape and markings of a World War II-era aircraft bomb, probably a 500-pound general-purpose bomb that had been dropped during training exercises and never recovered. The device appeared to be armed and stable, but any further excavation could trigger an explosion that would kill everyone within a 200-yard radius. Mike immediately stopped all work and approached Trevor, who was reviewing engineering drawings nearby. "We need to stop excavation immediately," Mike said quietly. "There's an unexploded ordnance in the dig site." Trevor looked up from his drawings with the patronizing expression he reserved for interruptions from laborers. "What are you talking about, Rodriguez? There's a bomb in the ground, a big one. World War II era, probably 500 pounds. It's armed and unstable." Trevor laughed. "Come on, Mike. This is downtown Portland, not a battlefield. You probably hit an old septic tank or utility line." "I know what bombs look like," Mike replied, his voice carrying a new authority that Trevor hadn't heard before. "And I know what they can do. We need to evacuate this site immediately." Trevor stood up, still smiling at what he considered Mike's overreaction. "Rodriguez, I appreciate your concern, but I think you're getting a little carried away. Let's take a look at what you actually found." Trevor followed Mike to the excavation site, expecting to find some harmless piece of buried infrastructure that the uneducated construction worker had mistaken for military ordnance. What he saw in the bottom of the hole made his smile disappear immediately. Partially exposed in the excavated soil was unmistakably the nose cone of a large military bomb. The distinctive shape, the faded but visible markings, and the heavy steel construction left no doubt about what they were looking at. "Jesus Christ," Trevor whispered. "Is that real?" "It's real," Mike confirmed, "and it's dangerous. Everyone needs to evacuate this site right now while I figure out how to handle it safely." Trevor stared at Mike with new confusion. "How to handle it?" "Mike, we need to call the police, the fire department, the bomb squad." "The bomb squad is 2 hours away," Mike replied calmly. "This device has been stable for 80 years, but excavation activities have compromised its position. Any vibration, impact, or continued digging could trigger detonation." Trevor was processing Mike's words with growing bewilderment. Mike looked around at the construction site where 100 workers were continuing their daily routines, unaware that they were working above a device that could kill them all. He made a decision that would change everything at Meridian Tower. "Because I spent 15 years defusing bombs in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm an EOD specialist, and that device needs to be handled by someone who knows what they're doing." Trevor stared at Mike as if he were seeing him for the first time. "Your explosive ordnance disposal, U.S. Army, 412 successful bomb disposals, including devices much more sophisticated than this one." The transformation in Trevor's expression was immediate and dramatic. The condescending smile, the casual dismissal, the assumption of intellectual superiority, all of it evaporated as he realized that the man he'd been mocking for 8 months was the most qualified person in the state to handle the crisis they were facing. "What do we do?" Trevor asked, his voice now carrying the deference he'd never shown Mike before. "You evacuate everyone to a safe distance while I assess the device and determine the best approach for neutralization." Word of the bomb discovery spread through the construction site within minutes, but Mike's military training helped him manage the evacuation with precision and calm authority. He understood that panic could be more dangerous than the ordnance itself,
so he coordinated the withdrawal of workers using the same systematic approach he'd applied to bomb disposal operations. "I need everyone to move calmly but quickly to the street," Mike announced through the site's communication system. "Leave all equipment where it is. Do not run. Do not gather personal belongings. Just walk directly to the evacuation assembly point." Trevor watched in amazement as Mike transformed from the quiet construction worker he'd been dismissing to a commanding presence who managed the crisis with professional competence. The other workers, sensing the gravity of the situation, followed Mike's instructions without question. Within 20 minutes, the entire construction site had been evacuated to a safe perimeter 300 yards from the bomb location. Police and fire department units were en route, but Mike knew that by the time professional bomb disposal teams arrived, the device could be further destabilized by environmental factors or nearby construction vibrations. "I'm going back in to assess the device," Mike told Trevor and the site supervisor. "The longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes." "You can't do that alone," Trevor protested. "What if something goes wrong?" Mike looked at the young engineer who'd spent months treating him like an intellectual inferior. "Trevor, I've been doing this job since before you graduated high school. I know what I'm doing. But the liability, the insurance, the protocols. The protocol for unexploded ordnance is to have it handled by qualified EOD personnel," Mike interrupted. "I'm the most qualified person within 100 miles of here." Mike began walking back toward the excavation site, carrying the same calm confidence he'd once brought to bomb disposal operations in Fallujah and Kandahar. Mike approached the unexploded device with the systematic precision that had kept him alive during 412 previous bomb disposal operations. He could see that the 500-pound aircraft bomb was a World War II-era M64 general-purpose bomb, probably dropped during training exercises and lost in what had once been farmland before Portland's urban development. The device was armed with an impact fuse that should have detonated on contact but had apparently malfunctioned when it hit the ground 8 decades earlier. The fuse was now corroded and unstable, meaning that any significant vibration could complete the firing sequence and detonate 300 pounds of Composition B explosive. Mike's first priority was stabilization. Using techniques he'd perfected in combat zones, he carefully excavated around the device to assess its condition and position. The bomb was lying at an angle that put additional stress on the fuse mechanism, making it even more dangerous than it would have been in a stable horizontal position. Working with hand tools to avoid any vibration that could trigger detonation, Mike spent 2 hours carefully adjusting the device's position and creating a stable platform that would prevent further movement. His movements were deliberate and controlled, every action calculated to minimize risk, while maximizing safety for the hundreds of people waiting beyond the evacuation perimeter. Trevor and the other engineers watched from the command post they'd established at the evacuation site, trying to understand how the man they'd been dismissing as just a digger was performing complex technical procedures that none of them could comprehend. Brad asked, staring through binoculars at Mike's precise work around the bomb. 15 years of EOD in Iraq and Afghanistan, Trevor replied quietly. 400 successful bomb disposals, and we've been calling him uneducated for 8 months. Trevor didn't respond, but his expression showed the weight of recognition that they'd been judging someone's intelligence based on their job title rather than their actual capabilities and experience. After 4 hours of careful work, Mike successfully neutralized the World War II bomb by removing the corroded fuse mechanism and separating it from the main explosive charge. The procedure required the same steady hands and systematic thinking that had made him one of the Army's most successful EOD specialists, applied to ordnance that was older but no less dangerous than the IEDs he'd defused in combat. When Mike finally stood up and gave the all-clear signal, the relief among the evacuated workers was overwhelming. 100 people had been saved from potential death or injury by the expertise of the man they'd been treating as intellectually inferior for months. The bomb squad arrived just as Mike was completing his work, expecting to find a dangerous situation requiring professional intervention. Instead, they found a textbook EOD operation performed by someone whose experience exceeded their own. "Sir," the bomb squad leader asked Mike, "what's your background in explosive ordnance disposal?" 15 years Army EOD, Mike replied simply. This was a standard unexploded ordnance removal. The bomb squad leader examined Mike's work with professional admiration. "This is perfect technique. You probably saved a lot of lives today." Mike looked back toward the construction site where his co-workers were beginning to return to their equipment. Just doing what needed to be done. But Trevor was listening to every word, finally understanding that the man he'd been mocking was someone whose expertise in life and death situations far exceeded anything taught in engineering school. The story of the construction worker who turned out to be a bomb disposal expert spread through Portland's construction industry within days, but the narrative that emerged was more complex than typical hero stories. This wasn't just about hidden expertise saving the day. It was about the dangers of judging people based on their current job rather than their complete experience and capabilities. Trevor struggled with the recognition that he'd spent 8 months displaying exactly the kind of intellectual arrogance that prevented effective teamwork and collaboration. The man he'd dismissed as uneducated had skills that could have saved everyone's lives in dozens of situations where Trevor's engineering knowledge would have been useless. "Mike," Trevor approached him the next day, "I owe you an apology. The way I've treated you, the things I've said, I was completely wrong." Mike continued adjusting his excavator controls while he listened. "Trevor, you weren't wrong about my education. I didn't go to MIT. I don't have an engineering degree. But you have experience I can't imagine. You know things that can't be taught in a classroom." Mike looked at the young engineer who'd spent months making him feel invisible. "Education comes in different forms. You learned how to design buildings that won't fall down. I learned how to handle situations where people's lives depend on getting it right the first time. Why didn't you ever tell us about your background? Because I didn't think it mattered for this job. I was wrong about that, just like you were wrong about me." Trevor nodded slowly. "What can I do to make this right? Treat people like they might know something you don't, regardless of what they do for work." In the months following the bomb disposal, the culture at Meridian Tower construction site changed dramatically. The management team implemented new protocols that valued input from workers at all levels, recognizing that experience and expertise could exist in unexpected forms, and that safety depended on listening to voices they'd previously ignored. Malik became the site's unofficial safety coordinator, applying his risk assessment skills to identify potential hazards before they became dangerous. His systematic approach to threat evaluation, developed during military service, improved safety protocols across the entire project. Trevor and Mike developed an unlikely partnership, combining engineering knowledge with practical experience to solve complex construction challenges. Trevor learned to appreciate the value of hands-on expertise, while Mike gained respect for the intellectual rigor required for structural engineering. "I've learned more about real-world problem-solving from Mike in 3 months than I did in 4 years of engineering school," Trevor told his supervisor during a project review meeting. The collaboration between white-collar and blue-collar expertise became a model for other construction projects, demonstrating that effective teamwork required recognizing and utilizing the full spectrum of knowledge and experience available within a work crew. Mike never returned to full-time military service, but he found ways to apply his EOD expertise to civilian safety challenges. He began consulting on construction projects that involved excavation in areas with potential unexploded ordnance, and he volunteered with local emergency response teams that needed expertise in handling dangerous materials. Sergeant Michael Rodriguez still works construction, still operates heavy machinery with the precision that comes from understanding that small mistakes can have large consequences. The Meridian Tower project was completed on schedule and under budget, with safety records that exceeded industry standards, largely due to the integration of Mike's risk assessment expertise with the engineering team's technical knowledge. The World War II bomb that nearly killed 100 people was safely transported to a military facility for proper disposal, but its discovery had revealed something more dangerous than unexploded ordnance: the assumption that intelligence and expertise could be measured by job titles and educational credentials rather than actual knowledge and experience. Trevor Walsh completed the Meridian Tower project with a fundamentally changed understanding of teamwork and professional respect. He learned that effective engineering required not just technical knowledge, but also the wisdom to recognize and utilize expertise wherever it existed. His approach to managing construction projects now emphasizes collaboration between all team members, regardless of their formal education or job classifications. The construction workers who evacuated that October morning learned that their quiet colleague had once saved lives in places they'd only seen on news reports, but more importantly, they learned that the person working next to them might have experiences and capabilities that could surprise them. They began sharing their own stories, military service, technical training, specialized knowledge that wasn't reflected in their current job descriptions. Mike's story spread beyond the construction industry, becoming part of ongoing conversations about recognizing value in all forms of work and understanding that career transitions often involve highly skilled people taking jobs that don't reflect their full capabilities. Veterans organizations used his example to advocate for better recognition of military skills in civilian employment. But perhaps the most important change was personal. Mike found that sharing his military experience helped him process the psychological challenges of transitioning from combat to civilian life. The respect he earned at Meridian Tower wasn't just for his bomb disposal skills, it was for his choice to use those skills in service of others, whether in military or civilian contexts. Late at night, after his shift ends and the construction site is quiet, Mike sometimes thinks about the bombs he defused in Iraq and Afghanistan, the lives saved by careful attention to detail and systematic risk assessment. But he also thinks about the bomb he defused in Portland, and how that experience helped 100 co-workers understand that expertise exists in unexpected places, and that everyone's experience has value. The most dangerous assumptions aren't always about explosive devices. Sometimes they're about explosive potential in people we think we understand but have never bothered to really know.
So I ask you, have you ever met someone like Sergeant Michael Rodriguez? Someone whose current job didn't reflect their extraordinary background, whose skills became apparent only when they were desperately needed, who chose humble work while carrying the experience of a hero. Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the service member, the quiet professional, the person everyone overlooked who turned out to have experience that could save lives. Because here at Stories of Secret Heroes, we know that the most important expertise often works quietly, without recognition, until the moment when everything depends on someone knowing exactly what to do. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with others. Help us honor the hidden heroes who bring extraordinary skills to ordinary jobs, and remind the world that intelligence comes in many forms and that everyone's experience deserves respect. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, remember to treat everyone with dignity, because you never know when the person digging beside you might be someone who once defused bombs in war zones. But more importantly, there's someone doing honest work that deserves your recognition, regardless of where they've been or what they've done. Real expertise isn't always measured in degrees or job titles. Sometimes it's measured in lives saved by people who know how to stay calm when everything around them is about to explode.